From its fruition, the United States of America represented a breakaway from regimentation, defying what was, at the time, the greatest military on Earth. This new world was the stomping ground for early pioneers to seek meaning in the great unknown, to discover purpose in the face of new challenges, and to achieve the unachievable. In the beginning, there was the individual. There were families. There were communities. And then, rather suddenly, the new world regressed into the ways of old, cycling backwards with the advent of compulsory schooling under a central government monopoly, conditioning warehoused children to grow into warehoused adults. Instead of a childhood spent wandering around the world's classroom, engaging in adventure, seeking mentorship, and discovering purpose, as children had done in centuries previous, children of the present are confined to an institution for 12 years of their lives, subjected to constant surveillance and evaluation under the guise of learning basic skills. Even though there is ample evidence to prove that reading, writing, and arithmetic take a couple hundred hours to transmit on an eager student, not a dozen years. So who benefits from public schooling? Who is orchestrating a system which rewards the obedient, but medicates and punishes those who deviate even in the slightest? Who is funding this hidden curriculum? The link between school and state was established in pre-Socratic Greece. Back in the day, the goal of schooling was to mold young boys into obedient warriors, with the system promoted and supported by the upper echelon of society. In the prominent military city-state of Sparta, compulsory schooling was enforced by forcibly taking young boys from their mothers and training them for 12 years under state-controlled supervision. Fast forward to the year 1717. When a national public school system was instituted in Europe by the Kingdom of Prussia, the power of that school system was harnessed after Prussia's defeat at the hands of Napoleon, with Prussia attributing their loss to disobedient soldiers. In order to compete with Great Britain and other imperial powers, Prussia sought to increase the state's hold on society. The result was that parents were fined if they failed to send their child to school. This method of compulsory public schooling served as a means of ensuring the state's position as guardian over the children during their key developmental years. Students were divided by age, like one would group products by date of manufacture, and these students moved through school like an assembly line, specific information being delivered at specific times, with the final product being a predictable and easy-to-control herd. While the origins of public school in the United States can be traced back to 1647 Massachusetts, private and decentralized schooling reigned supreme in the New World. It was the parents' responsibility to provide their child with a basic education, but in many cases, the responsibility of education shifted from parents to local communities, which would hire a schoolmaster to teach the children to read and write. Private schools and educators were subject to competition, forcing these institutions and individuals to provide unique value to students. Despite the notion that folks were by and large illiterate back in the day, recorded book sales of that time tell a much different story. Noah Webster's spelling book sold 5 million copies to an estimated population of 20 million in 1818. Thomas Paine's Common Sense pamphlet sold 120,000 copies to a colonial population of 3 million. So when career politician Horace Mann arrived on the scene and lobbied for a Prussian-inspired model of compulsory schooling and training schools for teachers, it wasn't out of society's inability to provide private and sufficient education for a spectrum of social classes. Instead, a perfect storm emerged in the decades leading up to the American Civil War that created an ideal atmosphere to introduce state control of public schooling. And it went a little something like this. When man met machine during the Industrial Revolution, agricultural communities dwindled, and families migrated to the city to find work, the fallout of which was the dismantling of the family economy, the destruction of small, self-sufficient local communities, an ever-growing dependency on remote authority, and the emergence of a new nobility. Industrial titans and family names we still recognize and answer to this day. You see, families of big industry like the Carnegies and the Rockefellers had learned a valuable lesson from history. They realized the industrial poor who were barely earning a living wage in their warehouses and factories were the revolutionists of days past. They knew that, in order to maintain control over their human cattle, their herd needed to be tended and cultivated, otherwise revolution, and perhaps even a little competition, was inevitable. Shortly after the Civil War, the Department of Education was established as the federal office but quickly downgraded in response to the concern over federal encroachment in state matters. By 1890, most states had implemented a Prussian-inspired compulsory public school system, and it was during that time that corporate interests set their sights on a new venture: the business of education. Philanthropy is, by definition, the desire to promote the welfare of others, expressed especially by the generous donation of money to good causes. It should be stated that philanthropic institutions have undoubtedly done some good for someone out there. But if we study the patterns of history, an obvious truth emerges. Philanthropy is essential for establishing familial power. In the case of the Rockefellers, philanthropy has served as a vehicle to shape public reputation, and this favorable reputation has proved more powerful than any tool that could be purchased. The illusion of benevolence allows select families, not elected officials, sway over public affairs. Furthermore, money given away to foundations can be given away to produce profit for the family, whilst deducting those donations from their taxes. More money into the well-oiled machine of compulsory schooling, which pushes a curriculum of rewritten history, memorization of fake facts, and the lessening of the individual with the goal of cranking out predictable adults to serve as employees and consumers, which means a wealth of income for corporate families who invest in education. The founding brothers of the Rockefeller oil monopoly, whose father was called Devil Bill as he was a well-known con artist and snake oil salesman, funneled $129 million into the creation of the General Education Board, which shaped our current schooling system. The Rockefellers and the Carnegie Foundations were key in managing schools specifically for African Americans in the South, using their private wealth to shape race relations. Meanwhile, the philanthropic Rockefeller Foundation began to fund medicine and medical studies, in tandem with actively participating in the funding of eugenics in the US, as well as globally. They were a primary financer of an institute that served as the Center for Eugenics Research until 1939. As a side note, how many Rockefeller children do you reckon attended public school over the last century? How many of our presidents or vice presidents attended public school? And how many attended private, elite boarding schools, where the curriculum was focused on problem-solving ability, the relationship between past, present, and future, and an emphasis on debate with the goal of producing a confident, innovative student? While the public school system was initially intended to be controlled by local governments within the states, as the years progressed, corporate advocates pushed for more consolidation and greater centralization of education. The full-on government takeover of taxpayer-funded education didn't all happen at once, of course. There were actually people within our government who attempted to intervene. It was in 1952 that an investigative committee looked into tax-exempt organizations, like the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations, to see if they were being used to support communism, or really oligarchical collectivism. Coincidentally, the chairman of the committee, Edward Cox, died the same year the committee was formed. It should be noted that the committee itself disbanded prematurely and without action despite its findings, which revealed that foundations had been using their influence to rewrite American history found in public school textbooks. However, the corporations running these foundations with interlocking board members managed to dodge any repercussions of their subversive activities by claiming the committee was criticizing free thought. In fact, the same year the committee released their findings, a member of the Rockefeller family, Nelson Rockefeller, became the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, and he later went on to be the Vice President of the United States. In 1979, Congress decided once again to create a federal Department of Education. Presidential candidate Ronald Reagan campaigned on the promise to abolish the department, but when he eventually took office and submitted a proposal to do so, nothing happened. It was later revealed by Reagan's senior policy advisor in the Department of Education that the groundwork for a Washington-controlled Common Core curriculum had been laid in the 1960s. That plan was expedited under George H.W. Bush's presidency, when he pushed for national goals to be instituted at the state level for public schools. This plan was reinforced by President Clinton and totally cemented by George W. Bush when he signed the No Child Left Behind Act in 2001, which placed federal control over school standards, student testing, and teacher qualifications. Furthermore, the Common Core Educational Initiative was instituted in 2010 that implemented more national standards about what children should know at each grade level. And these standards are of course measured by testing. This legislation was accomplished by private companies who had channeled millions of dollars into the education lobby for standardized testing. When students failed those tests and teachers failed to teach to those tests, the answer was for the US government to spend taxpayer money on materials sold by the same private companies who lobbied for the tests to begin with. This is the Hegelian dialectic of the education business, and it has been effective in solidifying corporate control over schooling, as well as churning out a bulk of the population who is alike, as they have been tested on the same material which was taught to them at the same time, in the same format, at the same juncture of all their lives. Over the last few decades, the Rockefeller, Ford, and Carnegie Foundations have been joined by other corporate juggernauts in their domination of the student's mind. Though it should be noted that while a distinction between these foundations exists, they all have interlocking board members and incestuous connections. The Walton family of the Walmart empire, with its talons also in central banking, has invested over $1 billion in the education system, only surpassed by the Gates Foundation, headed by Bill and Melinda Gates of Microsoft, who, like the Rockefellers, not only deals in alleged eugenics programs disguised as medical research, but also directly funds Common Core, paying to develop the standards and the tests. Is the Gates Foundation doing this out of the goodness of their heart, or do they own a stake in the big data businesses to which the Department of Education directs the bulk of its outsourcing? To top it all off, Pearson, a British textbook company, is the primary provider of textbooks for United States public schools. So, to summarize, we have a British monopoly teaching American students about American history and other subjects. We have a public school system controlled by a government monopoly, which is financed and controlled by global corporate monopolies, all of which are tied to the central banking system. If we follow the money from start to finish, corporate control of the public school system was made possible in the aftermath of the Civil War, during which Congress passed the Act of 1871, providing a government for the 10-mile parcel of land between Virginia and Maryland, the Virgin Mary we now call the District of Columbia, a city-state with its own police force, mayor, and its own set of laws. The Act of 1871 changed our country's founding fathers' original wording of the Constitution, and ultimately overturned the United States Constitutional Republic. Since 1871, the federal government has usurped nearly all the power that was formerly held in the hands of the people. Within the context of an incorporated United States, it would make sense that each citizen is assigned a social security number at birth that tracks earnings and years worked, like a less intrusive brand than cattle receive, but a marking of property nonetheless. The compulsory school system of an incorporated United States enforces students to obey the state, with the student-teacher relationship mirroring that of employee and supervisor. Further proof of this model is mirrored in the grading system. A successful student doesn't equate to an intelligent, innovative student, but a successful student is a compliant student who exemplifies obedience rather than actual knowledge or critical thinking. Because a corporation doesn't want competition or the slightest threat of revolution. A corporation wants an obedient worker. Compulsory education is compulsory subordination. This system is the very antithesis of education, and children of today have it even worse than previous generations. These children are now under constant surveillance and evaluation. These children are trained to wait on other people, for experts to tell them what to do, to pay attention until there is another distraction, and the distractions are endless. Students have no privacy at home either. Hours of homework follow them to the dinner table. The programming they consume in their downtime, the television, the video games, the good portion of the YouTube videos, all enforce the indoctrination taught at school, to believe in the infallibility of authority. The majority of children in the school system right now will grow into adults who are absolutely incapable of telling any form of authority what they want, and instead they will accept what they get. Teachers of the present have to function as surrogate parents because a portion of their students in their overcrowded classrooms are lacking one or both parents at home. And these teachers cannot teach at a higher level than the textbook, due to the ubiquity of standardized tests. The reality is, there is no reform for the system. It's a system that operates exactly as it was designed. Any amount of energy or anger directed at the human farmers of the system is unproductive and ultimately a distraction. And the purpose of this video is not to encourage violence or negativity towards the corporate monopoly, only awareness. The only way not to be treated as human cattle is to leave the farm, which means refusing to allow the state to raise your child. Whether that be through homeschooling, private school, or just taking the time out of your day to foster your child's creativity, to unschool them to the best of your ability, and to teach them that the last thing they are is cattle. Thank you all so much for watching. You know I always look forward to your comments. Please subscribe, and thank you for supporting my channel on Patreon.